Good evening. We are Coping Live Talk, and this is our 82nd time when we go live. Today we have a fascinating guest, Sue, and she will be talking today about coaching approach to people with illnesses that sometimes scare us. And with the help of coaching, I'm sure it will become much easier. At least people will have sense of direction and how to live with various illnesses. Am I right, Sue?
Absolutely correct, Dr. Lydia.
Absolutely. So welcome to our podcast. And here we have our co-hosts, Candy Sheehan and Scott Kittle. So today we will be talking about various illnesses. And Sue, could you introduce yourself first, that our audience knows who you are? And then we will hear your presentation about what your business, coaching business is about. Why did you set it up and started it? But then we will have questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Lydia. So my name is Sue Huey, and I'm with Supportergy Wellness, which is a online and face-to-face, so we're virtual and face-to-face, health and wellness coaching company, primarily for people with chronic illnesses. And this all started because myself and my business partner both have chronic autoimmune illnesses. So I have lupus, which kind of really messed up my life there for a while. Well, I was waiting to be diagnosed and then being diagnosed. And on top of that, ended up getting a secondary diagnosis of multiple sclerosis and then a whole host of other almost like related or secondary illnesses that frequently come with autoimmune diseases. So for me, it was important to try to gain control of my life and get back to living my life, because when you have a chronic illness, and especially when it's one that requires a lot of monitoring, medical monitoring, you end up going into this place of existing. You're not really living, you're existing, and you're existing with this illness. So, for example, once I was diagnosed, I would be sent off to go in to see, specialists. I would have lab work to do, blood work to do. And then it was just repeating, going back in to see the doctor, coming back and going back and forth. So I ended up in a place where it was like I wasn't actually living my life anymore. I felt really trapped in this existence. And I thought, oh my goodness, if this is my life, what am I going to do? And so I started looking at things I could do. And honestly, when you are diagnosed with a lot of illnesses, and it doesn't have to be something big like lupus or Parkinson's or even something like cancer, but it can be something like high blood pressure, another chronic illness that people don't recognize. It frequently changes your entire life, and it makes you wonder, what direction are you going in and how are you going to get back to normalcy? And I think right now with the pandemic, a lot of us feel, what is normal now? Where is that coming from? And how do we gain that? So for me, it was really looking at what I could control in my life. Because up until that point, once I was diagnosed, I was letting doctors dictate everything, my treatment, when I was going for tests, what that looked like. And my entire schedule was really between work and school, because I was a student at that time as well as working full time. Between work and school, I was fitting in all these doctor's appointments and lab tests and everything. And it felt like I no longer had any control in my life. And it was important to me to gain back control. And the way that I did that is by actually looking at the relationship I had with my chronic illnesses. There's so much stress involved with being chronically ill that, I had to change that. And I had to change thinking I'm a victim of having these illnesses to really changing things and saying, I have these illnesses, but that doesn't define who I am. And it certainly does not determine how I'm going to live my life entirely. And once I got my life kind of back on track, my business partner was looking at things and she was saying, I'm kind of envious of things. You seem to be in a better place. You're not talking about all of the negativity of having these conditions anymore. Things have really changed and I'm envious. Can you help me? And so I started helping her. And then just gradually, as we were talking, we realized there's a lot of people who'd probably like to get back a lot of control in their life. They would probably like to realize that you're not stuck in this endless cycle anymore. You're not cured. I'll be honest with you. You're not cured. You do heal. You heal your relationship with your condition, and you heal your relationship with wellness, which allows you to do so much more. And it just brings back so much fulfillment and joy in your life. And we felt that it was very important that we let people know that this is possible for them too. So that's really why the business got started.
Could I ask a question because I didn't quite understand? You saw me taking notes. I was trying to figure out. Did you say you were trying to heal your relationship with wellness, or what did?
With wellness, yes, ma'am.
Okay, explain that to me, please, just a little bit.
Absolutely. So for me, wellness used to be a case of having health and, being confident and feeling good and looking good. And unfortunately, in my instance, the medications I took really changed my appearance, and they changed what I could and could not do. And I had to go back. Oops. Sorry. I had to go back and reframe what really is wellness. And what I took for granted as wellness was honestly things like, hey, I'm a size whatever, and it was much smaller than I am now. And wellness was, I can eat whatever I want, not really worry about gaining weight. Well, that's not really what wellness was. So I had to revisit that entire concept and say, wellness is not just my health as far as, yes, I've got my diseases in check. It was my mental health, my emotional health, my spiritual health. It was the community health as well. What did I have for community? What did I have for support? So I actually had to heal that concept of wellness within myself and bring those pieces together in order to actually get to where I am.
Thank you. That's very helpful. That makes sense to me. I appreciate that. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, because autoimmune diseases, it's a big problem, and especially young women, when it hits them, it's scary. They are afraid of the future. They're afraid that their life will not be as long. How will they raise children? But lupus is something that is just happens. Could you talk a little about lupus? Like, for example, Lyme disease, that is kind of cost to you, because it's not depending on your body. It's an infection that comes from the bite.
Absolutely.
But lupus is different. Could you talk about, and so are all autoimmune diseases affect mentality and the psychology of people in the same way? Or if it is something that is kind of imposed on you by a tick, then people process is different.
So excellent question. So in case of lupus, it tends to be, but is not always a genetic condition. It can also be triggered by environmental factors. We just don't know enough about it. Just so that you know, we have no clue what really for one person versus another person it's triggered by. So for example, just because I have it, if I have a sister, it doesn't mean she'll end up with lupus either. It doesn't mean that her likelihood of getting it is any higher. It is really a disease where your own immune system is attacking healthy cells and organs. And in each person who has lupus, even if we have the same degree of illness, it's not going to represent itself in the same way in people. So it's as unique as the individuals that have it, which makes it a little bit harder to go through the treatment. And so you ask an excellent question about the psychology of it and the mental aspect of it. And I believe, having coached now a number of people and having studied this, when you have something that you're no longer in control of, when you have an illness that you're no longer in control of, such as an autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis is a great example where one day you might be able to walk with no problem, and the next day you have a flare up and you need a cane or you're in a wheelchair. And the outside world doesn't understand that. There's questions about it. And what happens is that when we fear those judgments and we fear those questions, we end up really doubting ourselves. And we end up really in a place where we don't even know how to identify ourselves anymore. So it messes us up mentally and emotionally because there's all of these other things. And you talked about fear, Dr. Lydia, and that's huge in it. You just don't know. Can you have children? If you have children, will you see them grow up? Um, can you work? What is that going to look like? Are you going to end up disabled? Do you have a shorter lifespan? Or even has your quality of life changed so much that you don't want to live it anymore?
Lydia, we can't hear you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for. I had to mute myself because I did not want to. I had a little echo, so I had to interrupt myself. So thank you so much because this is exactly what my question was. So especially women, especially young mothers, and to be hit by such a huge disease that affects longevity, body, mind. And so then I think your approach, coaching approach, is significant. For example, we all start Googling. As soon as we get out of the doctor's office, we run, right? So, okay, Lyme disease. Okay, lupus. And then we Google and we read. And we get horrified
Yeah.
because it's like the perspective is not promising. And so here you are coming in, and you have the resource, and you have experience. So could you share about how you start with the customer, like with the patient? Do you call them patients or customers?
I actually call them clients.
Or clients? Okay.
And the reason why I don't call them patients is that I'm not a doctor. I cannot medically call myself a doctor. I can't medically see them as a patient. I'm not a therapist, and this is where coaching is a little different than therapy, and very different than medical. So medical, of course, you're going to see the doctor. They're going to prescribe medication or treatment plans for you. When you're in therapy, you're working through something in the past, and it's based totally on psychology. So coaching is a little different. Health and wellness coaching is really all about where your current state is and helping you reach the future state or goals that you wish. And we do this by exploring several avenues. So we explore your mindset. We explore how you think. And we start to reframe those things so that you can actually achieve your goals. And there's accountability sessions. So when I'm dealing with a client and a client says, I'd like to engage in your services, I would like to have you coach me, we'll actually talk about what is it that they want to achieve in their wellness. And typically they'll give me their top 3 goals. And I'll ask them, what they hope to have if they achieve those goals. What does that look like when you have those goals? So I had one client who said to me, one of my biggest goals is to be able to do a half marathon. I have multiple sclerosis, but I want to do a half marathon. And I asked her what it would look like in her life if she achieved that goal of doing this half marathon. I can imagine doing it myself, but good for her. And she said to me, I have to do this to prove to myself that I'm still strong and I'm still athletic. And that would do everything with my confidence. And so we had to look at avenues of what's involved with getting into a half marathon. From her training to what does her mindset have to be, to even nutrition aspects. And we also explored what would it look like if she couldn't do the half marathon, if she had to stop partway through. And it's really about working within what we think and what we feel and reframing that to get us into that positive state and to get us into that mental state where we can achieve so much more. Because the interesting thing about the mind that I found through my studies is the mind doesn't really care what we believe. It just needs to believe something. And so sometimes, and we're geared for this, unfortunately, due to survival instinct, we're geared to focus on the negative, the scary stuff, the bad stuff, to keep ourselves safe. That's the function of our amygdala. That fight, flight, or fright syndrome kicks in, and we're like, oh, I can't do that. That's very scary. I now have lupus. My life is over. It's very scary. I should probably stay in my house and do safe things. And I take clients through this process of seeing it's not that scary. That's our way of keeping ourselves safe. And we need to thank and honor our inner body for wanting us to stay safe. But we also have to trust ourselves. And so we can reframe things in our mind. And the minute that we do that, we can achieve so much more. We really are our biggest barriers to what we want.
I was very curious. if it is difficult for people to set realistic goals, do your clients tend to shoot too low or do they shoot too high? You know, I think that would be very difficult to set realistic goals if I were in that position.
That is an excellent question, Candy. And I'm going to be honest with you, whether I'm dealing with somebody with a chronic condition that's very serious or with a chronic condition that's probably more well managed, say hypertension, high blood pressure, and they're taking pills regularly and watching their blood pressure, we still, as humans, we just don't do the best job of setting realistic goals. So I help them explore that. And we go through a process, you know. So for example, my client who wants to run this half marathon, I asked her what else she wants to do and what else she hopes to achieve by it. And as we go through this process of asking questions and narrowing it down, we get to that achievable, realistic goal. Because you're right, we don't start off that way at all.
You mentioned stress.
Yes, ma'am.
And the stress is a problem for everybody. But when stress affects people who have autoimmune diseases, so could you spend a little time share with our audience what is the difference when the person is affected by autoimmune disease and then comes into a stressful, not just situation that are common, but a prolonged stress, which also is caused by autoimmune disease, with all these questions and the doubts and fear. So stress is exacerbated. So could you talk a little about stress and people with autoimmune diseases?
Absolutely. So obviously everybody has stress, whether we have any illness or not. It's a fact of life. And I do want to say one thing here about stress. It's very important for me to get this piece out, is there's actually two types of stress, okay? There's the stress that we all think of, the heavy, negative stuff, also known as distress. And that's the stuff we're going to be talking about. But there's another aspect to stress that I like to bring into coaching, and it's known as eustress. This is the positive stress. This is that energy that we get. When we're excited about doing something, it's a little scary, but we're going to do it and it's going to be great. And we need to tap into that when we're dealing with our immune conditions. But distress, that negative stress that we all have, when we have it in short bursts, it impacts us probably the same as anyone else, right? It can impact our eating and our sleeping, which obviously are not great when you don't have the world's best health to begin with, because your immune system is attacking itself. As this carries on, we end up with chronic stress, which is a whole other issue. But as this carries on in our bodies, what happens is that it actually fuels the fire of our conditions. So in my case, what happens is that stress really feeds this whole ramping up of my immune system saying, we need to attack something and we need to do it now. And so it goes into what's known as a flare, or a flare up of the condition. And my lupus gets much, much more aggressive, and I become very sick. And sometimes I require medical intervention. So for people who have autoimmune conditions, our whole game in life is about balance. We want to balance what we're doing and what we need to do with the levels of stress that we have. And so we have to be careful not to take on too much stress in long terms, because it can actually lead to more negative outcomes with our conditions. And in some cases, it can lead to some permanent damage, as it allows, for example, in my case, it allows lupus to attack my kidneys. And if I'm not careful with it, I can end up with very serious kidney damage. So there is that need to balance it. But stress is also a fact of life. So we really have to get good at taking control of what we can control and allowing ourselves to not worry about the things that are outside of our control. Because if we stress over all of that, I'm constantly sick. I'm in the hospital. I require a lot of medical interventions, and I move from actually living the life I want to existing with my condition.
We have a question here from Jennifer Tanguay. What is your recommendations for fibro fog?
Oh my goodness. So that fibro fog, brain fog, those are so common with autoimmune conditions. They really are. And so what she's really talking about, if you're not familiar with it, it's where, for whatever reason, we don't really have we don't understand medically how this happens. It's like we're trying to think through a thick fog. We forget things. We can say something and forget it right away. I've walked into rooms knowing exactly what I'm going to get. And then the minute I get in that room, absolutely forgetting it. And so when we have autoimmune illnesses, and fibromyalgia is part of that autoimmune family piece. Some doctors will tell you it's a condition. Some doctors will tell you it's a syndrome. It doesn't matter. It exists and it's real. So that's important to recognize. And that that hard to think thing, there are things that we can do to help ourselves. We can't fix it, okay? But rest, proper hydration, proper nutrition, some mild exercise all helps with our wellness, which helps to fight some of the fibro fog. But the other thing that really helps, that I work with my clients on, is finding systems that work for you. So for me, my cell phone, I record stuff in my cell phone so that when I'm going somewhere, I don't forget anymore. And I don't have to look like I don't know what's going on, because a lot of times what we're really afraid of is that judgment, that fear of judgment we're going to get from people, that I forgot something, or I look like I just have no clue what's going on. So fibro fog and lupus fog, brain fog, whatever you want to call it, the big things around that are good nutrition. You want to eat a balanced diet with non-inflammatory foods. So things that you might want to avoid are vegetables that are in the nightshade family, things like eggplants and peppers and potatoes. Really watch, a lot of the microgreens are not necessarily ideal for us, and bean sprouts and alfalfa sprouts we want to stay away from. Getting proper hydration, and as much as we can, getting a solid 8 hours of sleep, if that's what works for you. Some people it's 6, some people it's 7, but getting that maximum sleep where we're reaching REM. So that's kind of what we recommend with fibro fog.
Very interesting. Another thing is that fibromyalgia is kind of a curious thing. Maybe no longer for you and for people who have it. But for me, it was like an excuse for people who say, oh, I have fibromyalgia. And I would say, wait a second, is it a disease? It took me like 10, 15 years until my mother was diagnosed with this. And I've learned that it is inflammation of all soft tissue. Yeah. And it is also painful. And so, of course, I never heard about fibro fog. But until it hits us, we don't believe. Exactly. But so when I took my mother to a specialist and he just pointed at certain spots on her body and she screamed and he said, fibromyalgia. And I thought, come on, I never believed in that, and now my mother has it. So that's quite a dreadful thing. And then, of course, fibro fog, young women. So we are trying to bring in today a young woman to have kind of a coaching experiment, but she cannot log in yet. So if it happens, then you will see the face on the screen. But let's continue for now. Candy and Scott, do you have questions?
I really deeply appreciated what you said about seeking wholeness as opposed to just getting one system in your body working in a way that's tolerable. And I suspect that our culture doesn't really think very much or very often about this idea of wholeness, balance of spirit, soul, body, relationships, all these things. What can you share with our audience about some of the ways to coordinate all these things and maybe investigate those areas where you don't have wholeness?
Excellent question, Scott. So, and I was like yourself, I really felt that the idea was we just got healthy, or we just dealt with our condition and then we just moved on, right? Right. And for me, what ended up happening was, with my condition, I ended up having to change a job and change how I did things, which obviously impacted my financial aspect of life, which also then impacted my mental aspect of life, because of how I identified. And I think that how a lot of people identify is by what we do. And so for me, it really was like, oh my goodness, now emotionally, I really don't like myself and I'm in a bad place emotionally. And where do I go? What lifts me up and what gives me that support? And so I had to look at, how I am doing spiritually and what does that look like, as well as what do I have in the way of community. So an easy thing for people to do as far as a task, but a very hard thing to do in practice, is to actually take time to write down, 5 things that they have going for themselves from a spiritual aspect, and 5 things that maybe aren't where they want it to be. And then they can explore those 5 areas and what could they do to make it better. 5 things in my community, 5 supports that I have in my community. Who can I go to? Who can I rely on when I can't get out and get my groceries? Things like that. And then 5 things that I can do better, or I can enlist in better. Because one of the things, Scott, that we dance around the edge of, I think, especially in the North American culture, is this concept of asking for assistance. It's almost like a sign of weakness, right? And I know for me, for the longest time, I wouldn't ask for help. And I'm very fortunate. I had an excellent set of friends who knew when I was struggling enough to actually step in and help. And I had to learn that asking for help is actually a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. But far more importantly than learning to ask for it is to accept it, because I was the worst person at accepting this help. I'd ask for it. I'd say, hey, I need help with doing X, Y, or Z. And somebody would come in and help. And I would almost get resentful and angry about it all. And I'd say, why is this happening? Part of it is how I felt about myself. But the other part of it is I had to look at, that spiritual aspect of my life and what was really going on there. Was there a deficiency there? And did I need to fill it up? Because when we have these types of deficiencies, we're trying to fill a hole within ourselves, right? And sometimes we fill it up with food. Sometimes we fill it up with anger. Sometimes we fill it up with drink. And sometimes we fill it up with, binge watching on TV. It doesn't really matter what we fill it up with, but we're filling it up with the wrong things. So I go through a checklist with people and I'll say, what are 5 things that are going great in your life? What are 5 things you're wishing would go a little bit better? What would it look like if they were going better? And how could you get to that place? And we go through that dealing with finances. We go through that dealing with, your mental health, your emotional health, your spiritual health, the concept of community. We explore all of that, because none of us, as much as we like to believe in the individual, none of us live entirely on an island, and we're not completely self-sufficient.
That's a perfect answer.
No.
Thank you. And what you touched is significant, because you talked about something as self-deception. When we do not accept, your word accept was very, very important, because when it comes to serious life-threatening diseases, I think we go into denial. We become resentful, like you said, angry, and all this kind of a bunch of emotions. They do not help. They work against. So here I promise to have experimental coaching session. We have a guest in the studio. I bring her up on the screen. Okay. Here is Jennifer. Jennifer, introduce yourself. And I think I removed myself that we have a few people on the screen. Just a second.
Hi, my name's Jennifer, but I normally go by Jen or Jenny. I have fibromyalgia. I was diagnosed about 2 years ago. I was working in home health, and unfortunately, due to my new elements, it wasn't working out so well. I thought I maybe injured myself at work, manhandling people, but apparently not. My husband talked me into going to see my doctor, who started running tests and found out that I might have lupus. So I went for further testing with a rheumatologist, and I cried and I yelled at God, and it wasn't fair. I wasn't ready for a death sentence, which later to find out lupus isn't exactly a death sentence anymore. about a year into the testing, they decided that it wasn't lupus, that I have fibromyalgia. And I guess that's a lot better than lupus, but we still have our struggles.
Absolutely, Jen. And it's not that it's better than having lupus. So don't ever look at your illness as less than something else, okay? That's the first thing I want to say to you. Your condition is every bit serious as somebody who has lupus or somebody else who also happens to have, like multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's. And so one of the things that I say to you, Jen, is, well, you have been given this particular burden to carry. You don't have to carry it alone within the day-to-day struggles. And I know there are a lot, and I know it is hard. And I know that it feels like sometimes people don't believe you and they think that you're making it up or that this is just an excuse, and it isn't. And I want you to know that. But within all of those things, Jen, we have the opportunity to make 1,000 decisions each day. We get to choose things that we want to do. We get to manage our energy as best we can. So it's hard, and I understand that, and I've been there with where you are. But I want you to know that we can actually change things. We can look at things that are within our control and take better charge of our life. So you've had a really rough journey, and it's not an uncommon journey, first of all, to even get diagnosed. What Jen is talking about, it's not uncommon. I went through something very similar with my diagnosis of over 5 years to actually get diagnosed. And I did hear during my time, Jen, so I want to say this to you just in case you've heard it. I did hear at one time, it's all in your head. You're making it up. It's an excuse. Okay, it's not an excuse. Nobody knows your body better than you do. So when you know something's wrong, it's wrong. It's these specialists, they don't know you well enough to know any better. So that's the first thing. It was not in your head. There was something wrong. Now it has a name. So what normally happens is we feel a bit of relief when we get that, okay, we've got this, followed by now what? And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, there isn't a lot of really definitive paths that we get to follow, medically speaking. But I can help you with some of this, and I'd like to help you with a small piece of it today, a very short piece, based off of the time that we have. But what is one area of your life with fibromyalgia that you want to change? What feels that is lacking in terms of your wellness that you want to really change and work on?
Gosh, there's a couple. Probably I wouldn't mind working on the sun sensitivity, because that tends to drain me or causes the headaches that ends up putting me in bed for the next few hours. I've got 3 active little boys at home, so we're outside a lot.
Absolutely. And what Jen is talking about is so common with fibromyalgia, where people get a sensitivity to smell, right? Smells can trigger migraines. Smells can make you so that it's nonstop vomiting. It's really, really impacting Jen's quality of life, and it shouldn't. She has 3 active little boys. She wants to be with them. She wants to enjoy them and be with them growing up. So one of the things, Jen, that I would ask is, have you noticed in any of the times when you have these sensitivities come up, have you noticed that there's certain smells that trigger things more?
Smells, I don't do the seafood. If I walk through Hy-Vee, for instance, they have their big seafood area in the back, and that it makes me sick.
Okay, so you know to avoid Hy-Vee, which is awesome. That's wonderful. That's that first step to really, and what we're doing right now with Jen is we're trying to find the actual triggers to get Jen to where she knows and she can prepare herself or avoid these places. So that's that taking control. That's those decisions we got to make to take control. So Jen knows her seafood. Have you noticed what about the smells of like diesel or gasoline? Does that trigger anything for you? Heavy perfume, paint? None of those. Okay. So for seafood, if we work off of that one, What do you hope to be able to do with as far as the sensitivity to seafood goes? Do you hope to just be able to identify and stay away? Or do you hope to be able to walk into Hy-Vee and be able to get through that all without feeling like you're going to, have this massive migraine?
It would be nice to be able to go around it without having any kind of reaction. Be able to go sit in a restaurant that has seafood and my family order it, or even make tuna here at the house. I don't know if my kids have ever had tuna actually, because I can't tolerate it. But I know my husband likes it.
Okay, so and that's fair. And this is what we're talking about again, is that quality of life. This is what Jen's really getting at right now, is the quality of life. And Jen may feel, I'm not saying that she does, but she may feel the reason why she wants to get around this sensitivity is because she feels right now she's denying people in her family, in her life, things that they enjoy. She's denying them opportunities, and she's denying them, experiences. And that's really hard when you have a chronic illness, because you do feel like a burden sometimes, because your needs are so heavy compared to everyone else's. And so when we're dealing with seafood sensitivity and scent sensitivities and stuff, a lot of times what we'll do is we'll start to keep a journal, Jen, of specific smells. Seafood is a very broad category. And so I would say, if you didn't go into Hy-Vee, but you exposed yourself to different fish, like does the smell of salmon bother you versus the smell of tuna versus the smell of squid or octopus or crab legs? Or is it, because I know for me, if I walk into grocery stores where they have the fish tanks, the crustacean tanks, you've got the clams, the crabs, the lobsters, are that smell, because they're not cleaned out that often, that smell is just too much for me. That's overwhelming, and I can't go anywhere near there. So I would ask you to actually start to keep a journal of the actual scents, because seafood is a very broad category. And actually, for a period of a couple of weeks, really drill down into what are those actual senses that are really bothering you, so that you, first of all, can identify them, and then we can work on a plan to get you to where you can maybe have some exposures, but not other exposures. And like I said, I cannot, to this day, I cannot go into any place where they have the tanks of the live, crabs and lobsters. There's just no way I can do it. And I know now from experience that it's because they're not really cleaned very well. And so that smell just permeates and it hangs in the air. So I actually know exactly which aisle I have to stop at in the grocery store. I can't go any further. So if I need something out of the other aisles, I now have a conversation with somebody and I say, like, hey, can you go, somebody that I trust in my life, whether it's a friend or it's my partner, can you go and get this, because I can't do it. We have a running joke, and we've actually turned it into a joke, Jen. There are things that I no longer do because I have lupus. Okay. We understand that there are days when I can't do something because my energy level is too low. So if the dishes don't get done, it's not the end of the world. I have lupus. Now, sometimes my partner will say, can't do the dishes either because he lives with somebody who has lupus. And that's kind of how we joke about it. And humor's super important to bring into this stuff, because otherwise everything just gets too heavy. But when I'm coaching you, we're just going to drill down into things that you've noticed, and I'll have you journal or keep a list of things, and we'll gradually take a look at certain exposures to see what's what. Does that make sense to you? Does that sound like something you could do?
Absolutely.
Perfect. Why don't you give that a try?
I will. Thank you.
What else do you want to work on?
The skin pain.
Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today. And thank you also for all your questions. And thank you, Sue, for helping us see how it goes. So if Jennifer, if you want to stay, please stay. I have a question. So when you start coaching, do you sort out your clients? Do you choose certain autoimmune diseases, or you just go with any clients who comes to you for help?
That's a fantastic question. So, well, I specialize in autoimmune diseases because I also specialize in holistic autoimmune nutrition, as well as health and wellness coaching. I work with people who have all sorts of chronic illnesses. So as much as I say, yes, I deal with people who have autoimmune, it's close to my heart because I have it, right? And I've lived it. And it's hard when you're working with somebody who doesn't understand what your condition is. But I will work with anyone who has a chronic illness because I believe that life can be made easier with your chronic illness when you change your relationship with your illness. Okay. And if I was in this for money, I'd probably not do it this way. Yes, I run a business, so yes, I want to have money coming in, but I'm not doing it solely for money. It's to help people and to make their lives better. And so when I'm working with a client or I'm looking at working with a client, the relationship I have with the client is far more important than what their condition is. I can always do research on a condition I don't know, and I can learn, and I have resources. But it's that relationship. If it's not a good fit for whatever reason, and it's not always a good fit, you meet somebody and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can work with this person, then there isn't really a lot of sense in trying to coach with that person.
So you take only people with autoimmune diseases, or we can refer people to you even with, let's say, chronic blood pressure or anxiety,
Yes, ma'am.
burnout.
Chronic stress, absolutely. Absolutely. They're all symptoms of a chronic illness. And we're completely fine in working with anyone with those types of conditions. If you're wanting to learn how to run a half marathon, please don't come to me because I can't even begin to do that.
Jennifer, Scott, and Candy, are we going to run marathons?
At
That
least
could
you
be a
won't go
goal.
to Stu to get the
But I
counseling.
have a question. For example, ALS. It is not an autoimmune disease. And at the same time, it's such a burden. And not burden, but scare. And absolutely so many life challenges come with that disease, and they're progressive. So will you take clients with ALS or their family members?
Yes, I will. I will take clients with ALS as well as their family members. And you mentioned a very key part right there, Dr. Liddy, that I just would like to touch on is that oftentimes our caregivers, the people that are in our lives, even if they're not providing us with actual care, our spouses, our family members, our friends, those supporters, our illnesses and our conditions can be just as hard for them as it is for us. And yes, we will take those people on because again, it's my reality too, right? So I understand that and I can appreciate that and work with people with those conditions as well. And then work with their family members.
We mentioned the word stress several times. And since stress, of course, is a part of our life, but also, unfortunately, in many cases, if it's too much stress or emotional problems, then it starts affecting our health. So how would you recommend our viewers to deal with stress? And of course, we will refer them to you for coaching, but in a few words.
One of there's really two things that we can easily incorporate into our life. And I know it's going to sound silly as I say this to you. There's two things that we can incorporate into our life to really beat stress, quick and simple. One of the first things is if you laugh. Laughter is a great way of really getting rid of stress quickly. So, and there's actually laugh meditation and laugh therapy now to help people get rid of stress. But that's a great way to do it. Another great way to get rid of stress, and especially if your stress makes you angry and you're already angry, is go for a walk or start to work out, and it will reduce your stress as well. So there are physical things that we can do that we do every day anyways that can reduce our stress. Of course, when we're stressed, they're the two things that we normally drop right away, right? We stop laughing because everything gets serious, and we don't work out because we're busy, right? And that really just allows our stress to build up. So what I tell people is, life is hard, but it's also really good. Take time to enjoy it. Laugh. There's no reason why you shouldn't laugh. And go for a walk. Get out in nature, especially if you want to do it with some friends. Burn off some of that stress and hey, feel great again.
Interesting. You brought. Go ahead, Stuckett. You're muted.
Silly me. I was wondering what your response was going to be to Jen's question about skin pain.
Jen's question about skin pain, very common again with fibromyalgia. And interestingly enough, this just segues in so nicely. The more that we're stressed, Jen, the more sensitive our skin actually gets when we have fibromyalgia. So really, there are things that we can do and there's things we can't do. So one of the first things that I would say to Jen is we need to look at how can we manage your stress? And we need to look again at those triggers and find things that will help to reduce those triggers. And in some cases, it's clothing. And I'll tell you, for me, one of the things, and it's going to sound so weird as I say this to you, Jen, but compression socks, they're so sexy, aren't they? But compression socks really work to help with some of the pain that I was having in my feet. So we can actually drill down and start looking at your clothing to help with some of that.
I still have a question about fibromyalgia, since now we have Jennifer in the office and you, Sue. What causes that? Is it just kind of falls on you, or it is genetic?
That is an excellent question. And you know what? Whoever has the answer to that, they're going to become very wealthy because we really don't know. We believe, and this is just a belief in the medical community, we believe that part of it may be an environmental thing that triggers it in our bodies. So in this instance, a lot of times they're talking pollution. When we talk environment, it's pollution or exposure to certain chemicals that somehow triggers this response. And it's now believed to be a neurological nerve condition. So again, we're starting to understand it more than, and Dr. Lydia, I've heard it too. It's an excuse, right? It's this made up thing. We now have definitive tests. They've done tests. They can see some things that prove that it does actually exist, because doctors, scientists always want to see it, right? Show me. It can't be subjective. It has to be objective. So we need those tests. And so we don't know what causes it. We believe it is an environmental piece. We believe stress may play a part in it. And we believe that people are probably predisposed to it, but we don't really know the source. So Dr. Litt, if you spent your time looking into the source, you'd be a very wealthy lady when you have that answer.
Absolutely. So probably, go ahead, Candy.
Well, I was just wondering, I thought you said, Sue, and correct me if I didn't hear you right, that really it does not necessarily run in family. So the fact that you would have it doesn't mean someone else in your family would. So maybe you were sensitive to something and maybe your other family members were not, or something.
That's an excellent point, Candy. And again, it's not been proven to be an autoimmune condition, but it's within that family. It's on the outlying edges of it. So a way to look at it is anytime we're dealing with a systemic condition, so anything within our body, heart disease, any of those things, although there may or may not be family factors that might make us more predisposed to it, at the end of the day, it's the unique composition of the person's body chemistry, how they deal with their health, and the nutrition. So ultimately, no matter what it is, there is a uniqueness to it.
Yes, so each client has unique story, unique body, and so you offer a unique approach.
That is correct.
And so when you talked about wellness approach, and you talked about spiritual component, emotional, psychological, and of course a systemic, right? Systemic approach when it is a systemic disease.
Yes.
So in terms of, we have a comment, just a second. I will just, So we have a comment from Deborah Boyd. She says, tech. So don't know what it means, but thank you very much for joining us today. So wellness. Wellness includes so many layers and edges and approaches. Could you tell me one more time to summarize it for our viewers? How to approach, since diseases are different, but seems like as a coach, you have a certain strategy, method. So could you share about that?
So really, when I'm dealing with any illness, doesn't just impact one aspect of your life. It impacts your entire life. And that part is what I call wellness. So it's going to impact your physical health. It's going to impact your mental health and your emotional health. It also impacts, your psychological, how you identify and everything like this. It impacts the financial health. Yeah. And it impacts communal health, right? How you are in a community and what that looks like in a community. So when I'm coaching with a client, if a client wants to go down that entire road of looking at all aspects of their wellness, we will go through and get that all back in alignment, because in a lot of cases, when we have a condition or a loved one of ours has a condition, there's one part of their life that is just it's lacking. There may be more. And the idea is to get you back in balance in your life, because when we have that wellness and everything is balanced, we know what we're in control of, and we can make the right decisions. We can do the right things. We can take care of ourselves better. Once we have that balance, our conditions are no longer running our lives. We are in control, and we're on a journey with our conditions.
Very interesting. We have a question.
Do I coach clients with mental diseases?
Yeah, do you coach clients with mental diseases?
I certainly have. And what I will say with any kind of disease is this is a part of your treatment plan. It is not the treatment plan. So if you have a mental illness, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's just, again, it's something that has happened to us. We'll certainly work with you, but again, it's important that you're still working with your medical team. But yes, we absolutely will.
So what you're saying that when you work with a client, you incorporate also his or her medical professionals approach, right? So do you work with doctors, or you simply work with the clients and recommend to work with the doctor?
Great question. So it really depends on the client. I have had some clients who have given their doctors and myself permission to kind of have a discussion about some things that are going on. But mostly I work with the client, and then they can bring things up with their doctor, or they can say, hey, my doctor wanted to know about this, or can you help me with this aspect of it? Reason for that is because doctors have their own little area that they work in that I am absolutely not skilled in. I admit that. And then I have my piece that I work in that a lot of times doctors are not trained in, and they certainly don't have the time for.
The reason I asked is that I'm a minister. And when I get people who come for me for consultation or coaching or mentoring, and then if I face a person or learn that a person has mental disease, I cannot work with them, I have to refer. But seems like your approach is different.
Right.
Seems like you can help.
My approach is to help them get control of their life, get balance of their life, right? So it's not solving or fixing the illness. It's simply helping them to find the harmony to live with their illness.
I see.
So you kind of have a
yes.
So you have you have a swim lane that you stay in.
And that explains what you talked about before about reframing.
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So reframing the not the mind, I would say, but maybe the thinking patterns, and that applies to anybody.
Yes.
Even with people who have mental diseases.
Yes.
I hope, Scott, I did not interrupt you. I think I did.
No, I'm just saying that both you, Dr. Lydia, and you, Sue, have your swim lane, your areas of training and competency, and you stay in that swim lane. So you don't try to go off and do the work of a psychiatrist or a medical professional, but you know what your mission is. You know what you're trained and competent to do, and you just do those things very well. But anything outside of that swim lane, you refer to the doctor, to the psychiatrist, etc., nutritionist, right?
Exactly.
Question. I'm sure that our viewers will ask this question too. What does it take to become a coach like you? Is it certain education or practice?
That's an excellent question. And coaching is an interesting thing, because you can become certified, but there's not a mandate to become certified. But I believe that you should be certified. I believe that you do have to be accountable to something. So I am a certified health and wellness coach. I'm also a certified holistic autoimmune nutrition specialist. I believe that you do need to have accreditation behind you. There are coaches out there who have absolutely nothing, and they kind of go out and they do their own thing, and there's no governing body that says that they don't have to. But because of my belief and where I've gone to be trained and to put in my hours, I also have to recertify on a regular basis. And I think that that's important because it means that we're doing our best. We're staying current and we're bringing the best product for our clients as opposed to somebody just deciding they're going to be a coach.
That's interesting. We have another question. Could you share one of your success stories?
Oh my goodness.
I like that question.
It's always a hard thing for me to talk about the successes, and I don't know why, because it shouldn't be hard, right? These are wonderful things. I actually had a client who really was had kind of given up on life. They were in that existing phase with their chronic illnesses, and they had to give up work. They couldn't even work anymore due to their condition. So they were feeling in a really bad place. They, like, oh my goodness, life is over. And through a long, don't think this is a short process, a long process of coaching them, we were able to get their confidence back up, get them to see themselves as being whole and enough. Because a lot of times when we're chronically ill, we forget that we're still people and we have a lot of value. We kind of drop that part. So we were able to help her get back onto that pace. She is now actually in a much higher level job than she ever was in before. She's enjoying her life, and she has gone on to volunteer with a group that is for her particular illnesses. She's become a huge advocate. So she's gone from literally being, everything is over, everything is wrong, to actually having her dream life as best she can.
That is a huge success, because you do not stop at the level when you help a person. You turn a person into an advocate to help others. So that is kind of reproducing your method. It's excellent. I love it.
Thank you.
So any
You
other
kind of help
questions?
them. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
go
just going to comment that you kind of facilitate them finding a reason to live,
Yeah.
kind of a mission or a purpose in life.
And Scott,
That
until
is-
you put it that way, it never occurred to me. But yes, you're right.
Absolutely. So
Wonderful.
I think what you do, you give people a gift of hope and joy. So Candy has a question.
Well, and it was really more of a comment because, my chronic condition right now is old age, and I've hit the point where I'm not going to get younger. But and listening to you, I've kind of worked it through in my mind. I think it's really important to think about the whole picture, your well-being and eating right and sleeping right and doing the things I can do, and realizing I can't run a race anymore. That's not going to be something that I'll probably do, except some limitations, but try to set realistic goals and be able to keep those. So really, to me, your coaching really deals so much with living a complete whole life, and I think it's very impressive. It really would work for anyone at any time. Do you ever work with people who are really not exactly chronically ill, but just need a coach? I'm curious about that.
I have in the past, certainly, and I'm not opposed to it. Obviously, it's just been for people with chronic conditions. There's not a lot of coaches out there who actually get it. But absolutely, if somebody was to say, what, I want to do something different with my life, it's not where I want it to be, I'm not going to say no. And Candy, the one thing I would tell you with chronic old age, as you call it, I like to call it chronically maturing. It's a little bit nicer to look at. Is, well, you might not be able to run half a marathon, but there's other things that you get to do that other people who aren't at that maturity stage yet can't do. So it's all about finding that good part and really embracing that and saying, what, the past is the past. I can't control it. I can let it go. I don't have to carry that anymore.
That's excellent. And especially knowing Candy, I think she does run marathon every day. You are the most energetic and happy person I ever met. So Candy, yes, but it's an excellent question. Thank you. I want to ask Jennifer in the end, was this kind of experimental coaching session helpful to you?
Absolutely. It's nice talking to people who get it.
Thank you. So with this, we will conclude our session. And thanks, Sue, for this flexibility to do so many things in 1 hour. But what I want to ask you, to give us to do us a favor. Will you agree to come back?
Well, I agree
Because-
to come back.
We would love to have you as our guest again. There are so many layers we could not touch today. And one of them, autism. Autism is, we will have a guest on January 8th who will be talking about his journey with autism, not being able to write and becoming an author one day. So, but I think your wellness approach could help so many young and mature people who live with this disease or this condition. So, Sue, thank you. It was an exemplary podcast. Very interesting, lots of energy, and lots of information. So, I will contact you, and maybe we can schedule another podcast. What do you think, Candy, Scott, and Jen?
That sounds great.
Yeah, big
Love to
thumb
have
to
you
that.
back.
Also, in the end, I would love to ask you to tell people how can they find you.
It's a great question. So, Candy, I would, Candy, Dr. Lydia, I'd love to come back. I was looking at Candy's background. I was like, that's so beautiful. I would love to come back. It would be an honor, again, to be able to come back on. If people wish to contact me, they can find me through a couple of different ways. We have a website. It's https supportigy.com. We are on Instagram as Supportigy Wellness, and we're on Twitter as Supportigy1. And you
And
can
then-
also, yeah,
Go ahead.
Scott's doing it. You can also just send an email at coach@supportigy.com.
Okay, and I'm typing it.
Thank you very much.
Like this?
No, it would be more like I'll put it in the chat.
Just a second. So
Scott
what
got
should
it?
I correct?
Scott's got it right in the chat. So it will be https@supportigy.com.
HTTPS. Okay.
Yeah, and just
That-
remove from
Lydia, I
wellness.
put it in the chat already.
Okay.
You just copy and paste.
Oh, wonderful. I just do that. Thank you. So any phone number, so people just can find it on your website. Correct?
They can find it on the website. Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm displaying it in a minute. And here it is. Thank you, Scott. He's our tech person. And thank you. Thank you. We wish you a wonderful Merry Christmas and holiday, whatever way you call it. And also to your partner, who Tammy, who helped us to find you and invite you to share about your coaching approach. Thank you very much, and thank you, Candy, Scott, and Jennifer. God bless you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks. God bless.